teaching in NYU Shanghai. I think there was another part of your question I forgot, but.
The view with the knowledge or idea has been created.
Well, you know, to be honest, I've been really disappointed that we just haven't had the kind of political environment where we could think about, you know, speeding up technological progress and doing something as bold as we did when, it's like, okay, let's invent computer science. You know, that was a bold, good thing to do. In an earlier period in the United States, we invented chemical engineering and schools of chemical engineering. So I've been a little disappointed that the government hasn't been able to take the lead on anything in technology policy. But, you know, you have to take the long view on these things. In terms of connections, the surprise that emerged out of this work on growth is as follows. I was trying to understand, why is growth speeding up over time? It wasn't just, even though resources are scarce, we're maintaining growth. Growth was getting faster and faster. As Andy alluded to in the part he quoted from my work, what's driving this is that we've got more people connected with each other, all working to learn new things. So it isn't just that we stand on the shoulders of giants, it's we're part of a very big team. And the bigger the team gets, the faster progress we can make together. So this work that seemed like it had nothing to do with trade, I think actually provides a much deeper justification and rationale for why globalization is so important. And again, I can't point to direct consequences of that, although people are much more attentive since I worked in the early 80s on things like international property rights and how property rights now get incorporated into trade agreements. So there's certainly, you know, some awareness and some recognition of these issues. But I think what we need to all keep in mind is that globalization is not just about trading stuff. You know, because we got enough stuff here, and, you know, people in other parts of the world have their own stuff. Globalization is about sharing ideas, sharing things we learn. And that's why it's worth defending and protecting.
Congratulations, Dr. Romer. I'm with W Radio Columbia. Climate change is part of...
Columbia University?
No,
city.
Country.
Okay, got it. I'm due back for Monteria and Valle du Par, so you got to get me an invitation. So.
Obviously, yes. We're waiting for you there. Climate change is part of the investigation. So what would you say to a person with authority or not, president or not, who denies climate change?
There's a phrase which I'm afraid may come across as more politically charged, but I don't mean it that way. But it's that you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And this really is the essence of what science can do, is people will make different value judgments, they'll have different preferences, different priorities, but what science can do is provide a statement of the facts. And science is actually it's the most important thing that humans have ever invented. This community of people who actually make progress on average towards the fact. And as I described in my own experience, I mean, it's a kind of bouncy, you know, uneven kind of process, and people are people, and, you know, we're never all that consistent or well behaved, but yet science works. And I think what's a little bit troubling, even though I remain very optimistic about technological possibilities, is that it seems as though we're starting to lose our commitment to the facts. And to think about this in a somewhat, I think mostly apolitical context, just think about the anti-vax movement. This started with a piece of fraud by a university researcher, so I think we need to be mindful of how incredibly dangerous and compromising it is for all of us if we look the other way when we see something like academic fraud. We just have to have zero tolerance for this. But the fraud was uncovered, but yet the anti-vax kind of movement has continued to just propagate. My daughter's a pediatrician, and she was telling me something I think I knew, but to hear it firsthand was so gripping. Her less educated families had no problem listening to her as an expert in vaccinating their children. It was the better educated families. She lives in California. It's the better educated families who were all skeptical and, had these crazy ideas about vaccines. So I think that it's a very important time for us to try and agree and support some process that establishes the facts, because this process of better standards of living, better health, better opportunities, more equal opportunities. So this process all derives from some system which figures out what's true and what's not. And it's so important to the future that should be, I think, a very high priority going forward. It may become, even though I'm going back to Ethiopia, and still remain very committed to the power of urbanization to help people in the developing world. I think we may need to organize a kind of effort to understand science, I mean this more broadly. My girlfriend is a professor of French literature and bristles a little bit when I say science, as if the humanities don't matter. But it's the whole life of intellectual inquiry that the university represents. That's part of sharpening our ability to communicate with each other, figure out what's true, make the logical connections, disagree with each other in a way which is respectful but forceful. All of those things are part of what the whole university community does, and they're very important to defend and protect.
Thank you. I'm Goro Ui from TV Tokyo. This is Japanese TV company. My question is, Japan's inflation and economic growth are having very slowing now. So do you think to continue having economic growth, what should Japan need to do?
There's one of the reasons that growth is a confusing topic for people is there's two different types of growth. The way I would teach it, like in the MBA courses here, would be to say there's something we call potential output. And it's things like bringing in new technologies, raising skill levels, building better infrastructure. Those things steadily increase potential output over time. There's a very different set of forces that can influence whether we remain at potential output or if we fall below and have massive unemployment, or, and this hasn't been a problem recently, but in the past, or if we go above potential, which you can do temporarily, but which in the past at least tended to lead to inflation. So anytime you ask about growth, you have to be thinking about, well, which kind do I mean? And when economists say something like, well, what will happen if the savings rate goes up? What will happen to growth if the savings rate goes up? You have to ask, you have to say either, well, it depends, or you have to say, which type of growth do you mean? Higher savings rate can slow down this process of getting back to full employment, to potential employment. But more saving, more investing in the future can increase potential output over time. Japan was one of the first countries to suffer from this problem of very low interest rates and an inability to use monetary policy to get back to potential output. But in the longer run, its growth prospects will be determined by its commitment to raising skill levels, bringing in new ideas, and making those kinds of investments that will keep improving the quality of life. And the trick in policy is to juggle these two different imperatives, which can call for different types of policy responses. We joke about a two-handed answer in economics. Well, you know, that was a two-handed answer.
Hi, Ethan Wolfman from Yahoo Finance. You were just talking about how there, may be some fact issues going on right now. I'm wondering, how do you get government and politicians to care what economists and other academics have to say, to care about the facts and to to look at that when they're making policy?
Well, I went to the World Bank immediately after the Brexit vote. And there's an interesting analysis that I think is very insightful about the people that they refer to as somewheres and anywheres. But if you set that aside, part of the Brexit vote was a bunch of people saying, these groups of there's somewheres, people from a place. It was a bunch of people saying, you know, if all the economists are for it, I'm against it. And so I think we live in a democracy, so the voters actually rule in the end. So I took Brexit as a serious warning that economists need to think about why we'd lost our legitimacy with those people. Had we overstepped in promoting some value judgments rather than just the facts? So the very first step is that we got to make sure that we've got our act together, and we can really claim integrity, honesty, open disagreement, and claim that we have a process that moves towards the facts. And be appropriately humble about what any one of us really knows and what we collectively can know. So that's the very first step. I don't know how you organize the political action to help translate that into practice. But communicating the facts can help. There are a number of parents in the United States who've started to think that a university education is a waste of time. If you look at surveys, there's these hotbeds of liberal kind of views, or protections of safe space or something. I heard a paper where they showed that if you just show people, here's how much your average earnings go up if you get a degree from just the existing universities in the United States. That fact actually changed minds, because they didn't realize that whatever you might not like about some of the optics at a few places, university is this transformative experience for young people. So we got to be sure we're not like shouting or joining in on a shouting match, but we need to be credible and say, look, let's just look at what it does to earnings on average if you get a degree. And I think if we stick to that approach, we'll have done our jobs. And then my father was a politician. There'll be people who are like political entrepreneurs who figure out how to mobilize coalitions to get things done. But that's a different game. And I think we have to be very careful about what our role is. If we're going to be like the umpires in the fact business, we can't go get on the playing field and try and score a goal too. So.
Hi, Steve Burns with WCBS Radio. I'm the local news guy. Our newsroom's right around the corner. So I wanted to ask, what does it mean to be in New York when you win this? What is your relationship with New York, and how has New York influenced your research?
Well, first, economists assume that people know what they like. It's just not true. I thought I was going to hate it when I moved to New York. I loved Palo Alto, and I came here just because NYU had this great opportunity. So I was smitten with the city when I got here. So, one, I had no idea how much I was going to enjoy the city. Two, I wish I weren't living here, actually, because New York is probably the most successful city in the world. And the planning approach that it took, starting with this plan in 1811, is the model that everybody should be following. And when I say that as somebody from the United States and from New York, it's hard to